Okay, we're recording. Thank you everyone for joining the meeting of Vermont's Environmental Justice Interagency Committee. Welcome. And then let's hop to community agreements. Anyone want to read the first one?
Sure, I'll grab it. Be present with yourself and one another. Be present with your body and feelings. If you need to take a break to take care of yourself, please do. Be present for one another by listening deeply.
I'll take number 2. Calling in and calling out. Assume best intent, but attend to impact. We can stop things that are being said that are hurtful and be curious and create a space for learning. Tools include using oops or ouch to indicate a pause is needed.
Thanks, Dave.
I can
This
take
is
the third.
Grace. Oh,
You go ahead,
sorry.
Grace. No, go ahead.
This is
I'll do
Grace.
the next
I'll do
one.
number 3. Expect and accept non-closure. We are unlikely to leave here feeling 100% ready to go or to have everything on our agenda wrapped up, especially if we are committed to moving at the speed of trust.
This is Claire. Number 4, center respect. Be respectful, intentional, and work to build trust and create a safe and inviting space.
This is Becca. I can take number 5. Share verbal and other space mindfully. Consider the balance of taking and making space. Move up, move back. Tools to do this include the acronym WAIT, wait, why am I talking? And vocalizing support for another person's comment without repeating the same points that they have already made.
Thank you. So let's give thumbs up, just so we know that we all agree. Perfect. Let's keep going. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. Let's get started by approving the September 17 meeting minutes. If you approve, just give us a thumbs up as well. Perfect. I think that was everyone. And so the agenda today, we're going to reorient ourselves to the community engagement plans. And then after that, each of you will share out updates from your agency. We'll break for public comment if folks are on, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. And then we'll have a discussion all together about different community engagement plan formats. And then you all will have a working session, we'll debrief, and then talk about updates. Thumbs up if that sounds good to you or if you feel like we're missing anything. Perfect. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So the reorientation to the community engagement plans, we're going to be reviewing what the law says about the plans, what's required, and then we'll briefly review the core principles of community engagement. And then the outcomes are just for you all to understand what's actually required and then what the role the core principles will play in these plans. All right, so here are the statutory requirements. The community engagement plans must describe how each agency will engage with EJFPs as it evaluates new and existing activities and programs. Describe how each covered agency will provide meaningful participation in compliance with Title VI. and then also be informed by the core principles of community engagement, and then be developed in consultation with the advisory council. And then the deadline is July 1st, 2027. I also want to note that we'll be talking about EJFPs in executive session, more than likely in the joint meeting on November 17. So there'll be a discussion where we can go into detail on that. Next slide. Okay. So community engagement, these are simply opportunities to connect and interface with community members. Meaningful engagement ensures that community members have opportunities to inform and participate in decision making. These opportunities must not be burdensome or cause harm. And we also like to acknowledge that there are systemic barriers that are built into the structures, policies, and practices of institutions and organizations, and they're perpetuated by all of us because we are interwoven into these systems. And so each of our agencies also might have specific overlapping systemic barriers, but also specific barriers unique to each agency. So those are things that we're also individually trying to navigate as well. And why is community engagement important for agencies to do? Civil rights. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 requires that members of the public can meaningfully participate and access all of our programs, benefits, and services. And then there's also the federal requirements. So we all receive federal funding. And so we're also, in our community engagement plans, we're also required to meet any additional requirements for meaningful engagement that, you know, the federal agencies require. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, all of us don't necessarily receive federal funding.
Yes.
Just a couple of the entities don't.
Yes, yeah. But if and then for environmental justice reasons, Act 154 of 2022, Vermont EJ law says that, you know, affirms the right to self-determination, fair treatment, and meaningful engagement for all peoples. And then I'll pass it to Juliet.
Cool, thank you, Kim. So this slide is kind of interesting. It's not an exhaustive list, I'll just say, but what doesn't a community engagement plan do? This is a conversation that we've had internally at our agency to help narrow the scope of what a community engagement plan is intended to achieve, and to kind of provide a little bit more clarity to our own staff. Thought it would be helpful to share here today. So a community engagement plan is not a public relations campaign. It's rather a way to ensure that community members are inserted into decision making as it occurs, as opposed to just sort of like superficial optics, let's say. It's also not a way to get buy-in for decisions. It should be a way to get involvement before a decision is made, at the risk of being repetitive. A community engagement plan is not an extractive effort. We want to try and make this something that is reciprocal. And it's also not a top-down directive. So at A&R, we're doing our best to develop a community engagement plan that is built by A&R staff themselves. So we're trying not to make this sort of like a leadership decision or something that people feel like they have no sort of say over what the contents are, and you know, being able to express their needs in the development of the community engagement plan. And then finally, a community engagement plan is not reinventing the wheel. This kind of work has been done by a million people, a million different ways, and there's also been a lot of really good research on ways to engage communities that's not harmful, it is reciprocal, and is bent on or built on continuity and trust. And so no one is expecting the covered agencies to reinvent the wheel in their community engagement plans, but rather kind of build off of the good work that's already been done. So we'll talk about that more today. Did you have a question, Jenny?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could explain what extractive effort means.
Yeah. So a lot of I guess a good place to start is that the core principles of community engagement is built in part on research that shows that state governments often historically will go into communities to get information and then not really give anything back or not even show, hey, here's actually how we took your feedback and turned it into something different or better and more improved in terms of decision making. So one of the goals I think that the core principle sets forward is the intention for us to be more reciprocal in our giving and taking from communities as opposed to just helicoptering in, taking what we want, and then disappearing, if that makes sense.
It's quiz for us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I wasn't sure, you said you're using different technology, and I just wanted to acknowledge the question from Susanna in the chat regarding quorum.
That's a great, good point. I can't see it. Is
Yeah.
Susanna just asking if we've achieved quorum?
I'm sorry?
Is Susanna asking if we've achieved quorum?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I can't see everybody who's in this meeting, but I think that
Yes, we have.
nine of the 11 seats are here.
I think she may be asking to join the conversation if she's needed for a quorum. But yes, we are. So let me just respond to her. Thank you, Dave, for flagging Susanna's question.
All right, Jenny.
You're fine. Also, I'm having allergies. I'm not just getting her sick, I promise.
So just to clarify, Susanna's not currently in the meeting, but she just asked in case she needs to jump in to help us achieve quorum. Okay, yeah, so we do have quorum.
Yes.
I think in that case, I think 8 of the 9 or 8 of the 11 seats are currently present. So we do have quorum and I think we're all set. Are there any questions about, or any other questions about this slide before I pass it or before we continue? Okay, cool. Thanks for flagging that, Dave. I can't see the chat with the current technology I'm using. So as Kim mentioned before, one of the really key parts that of the requirements for our community engagement plans that the EJ law sets forth is that it should be built off of the core principles of community engagement, which, as you know, were developed by the advisory council and you guys over a year ago. At this point, it was finalized. So really good work in that case. We're just going to really quickly, because we know this is review, take a look at those core principles just to ground us all in what they say and remind us all what our intentions are with this community engagement plan work. Is everyone able to read these to themselves? I can't see anybody, so if I could get verbal confirmation, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, folks are nodding.
Okay, great. Let me know when you guys are ready to read the next set of principles.
I think we're good to move to the next slide.
Okay. So this is the second half of the 12 principles. I'll just leave this here for you guys to read.
All right, Juliet, we're good.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. So next we want to take some time to have a little bit of a conversation, or have you all share out about your community engagement plan development process. So first, our agency is going to take a couple of minutes to just share a few updates with you all about our work and what we're doing internally at A&R. And then we can take some time for each agency that's present to share some things. That could be types of community engagement that your agency is currently doing, where your agency has identified that you need support when it comes to community engagement in general, or the development of your community engagement plan, and or tangible steps that have already been taken towards developing a community engagement plan. And the purpose of this share out is really just to spur some inspiration amongst all of us, so that we are hearing about the good work that's already being done across the different agencies, and get us thinking about things that we can continue to do to move this work forward. So we'll start with A&R, and just really quick, I want to share some outcomes. So during these share outs, hopefully you'll be able to gain an understanding of how A&R is approaching, how A&R's approach can inform the processes, roles, and milestones across agencies. Hopefully we can all gain an understanding of where each of the agencies are in developing their community engagement plans, and what challenges and opportunities exist in this work. And then finally, hopefully we can all identify some opportunities for collaboration across or amongst agencies. We know that there are agencies that are in uniquely similar positions that may want to, collaborate in their community engagement plans due to how uniquely but similarly situated they are. So I'm going to pass it to Kim to share a little bit about our community engagement plan development process at A&R.
Thank you. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. All right, so what will A&R's community engagement plan do? The main purpose of our plan is to capture existing practices across the agency, to enhance technical support for staff who do community engagement, and then also to ensure uniformity and compliance across the agency. So our first task was to build capacity for the work, and that involved creating the community engagement task group, who is leading the charge on developing the community engagement plan and has representation from across the agency. And then there's our unit, which is supporting with coordinating communications between all of the relevant groups, and then also providing technical assistance. Also, we have our environmental justice network. So those folks across the network provide consultation and insight on staff needs. and then also reviewing and revising the engagement plan once it's developed. And then the advisory council providing consultation, and then you all sharing information and resources, and then also coordinating the implementation within your agencies. Task 2, we did an assessment of the current community engagement practices. So that involved reviewing the core principles of community engagement, and then gathering information about what's going on currently, and then assessing the effectiveness of the efforts, and then also gathering information about other community engagement plans by other entities. Task 3, define the scope and the objectives. So reviewing the Vermont EJ law requirements, setting general objectives that outline what the engagement plan aims to achieve, and then identifying the focus communities. Task 4 is staff review. So develop an initial draft of the community engagement plan, and then solicit feedback from agency staff on the initial draft, and then ensure that agency staff can weigh in on the feasibility and applicability of the contents of the plan. And I'll pass it to Juliet to talk about task 5.
Thanks, Kim. So you'll see tasks 5 and 6 are very similar to task 4. Basically, task 4 was staff review, and this is going to be leadership review. So we'll develop a second draft of the A&R community engagement plan based off of the feedback we received from agency staff. And then we'll make sure that that feedback is properly applied to the draft before we then solicit feedback from our agency leadership. We think that it's really important to get agency leadership early, getting their eyes on this document early on in the development process, just because leadership sort of directs the direction of the agency. And so, we wouldn't want to present anything, for example, to externally or to the public that hasn't already gotten a thumbs up from agency leadership that they wouldn't be comfortable, potentially creating expectations outside of the agency. So that brings us actually to task 6, which is what we're calling like external review. So we'll develop a third draft of this community engagement plan based off of agency leadership feedback. And then this is where we will directly solicit feedback from the advisory council on this third draft of the community engagement plan. I'm going to put an asterisk here, which is to say that this is what we're showing you is just the work plan for A&R's community engagement plan task group. And so it doesn't include contemplation of public meetings that are going to take place between now and whenever we get to task 6. So this is actually, it appears, because of the work plan being kind of limited in scope, it appears that this is the first time that we will be, consulting the advisory council, and that's not true. The advisory council is going to be consulted many times on community engagement plans throughout this process in terms of feedback or information gathering and, through joint meetings that we have with you guys. So I just want to note that this is the first time that you're seeing the advisory council show up in this work plan, but that doesn't mean that it's the first time the advisory council is showing up in the work. And I think that's really important to note. The other thing I want to say is that we have, toyed with the idea of hosting a public comment period to receive feedback on the community engagement plan. I think in a lot of ways that sounds pretty intuitive, is that you should engage the public on how they want to be engaged. However, it's not statutorily required, and it still remains to be seen what sorts of resources and capacity we have to stand something like this up. But I just want to put it out there that this is something that we're considering at our agency. And although it's not statutorily required, you may want to consider it as well. And then task 7 is pretty straightforward. finalization. So once we get external feedback from potentially the public and definitely the advisory council, that's where we'll develop a final community engagement plan. And we'll need to make sure before it's finalized that it actually is in alignment with all the feedback we've received with the EJ law's requirements and all the values that we sort of put forth as a foundation of this work. And yeah, then it'll be ready for public consumption. So 7 very easy tasks in sum.
Here's Jen.
Hey, Janet.
Oh, it's
How's it going? We just got joined by Janet from the LURB. So you actually jumped in at the perfect time, Janet, because I'm doing just a quick summary of all the talking that we just did.
Okay.
And then I'll stop talking.
Okay.
So in sum, this is just a visual sort of work plan for how our community engagement plan task group is going to work over the next year and a half or so. And we're currently, as you can tell, right about to enter 2026 and therefore closing out this assessment of current community engagement practices. So at our agency, we kind of sent out a little survey where folks, predominantly division leadership, answered the survey on behalf of their division about their current community engagement practices, and we're receiving those responses now. And then we will move forward into the unknown. And this is a reminder, again, the statutory deadline for the community engagement plans are July 1st, 2027. That was a lot of information about what we're doing. And I think we'd like to take a minute for public comment first, Kim, and then hear from the other agencies, or are we going to do public comment after we hear from the other agencies?
We were gonna do public comment and then take a little break.
Okay.
Or actually, no, I'll leave it up to you since we have a little bit of wiggle room. I don't think there are any members of the public here. Let me just double check. Yep. So we can either take a break right now for 15 minutes or everyone can do their share ups.
I guess it's up to you guys on if you need a couple minutes to collect your thoughts before sharing with the group, or if you'd rather just jump in.
I'm up for jumping in if people don't need a break yet.
I'm happy
Okay.
to keep going.
All right, then we'll do the break after. Okay, so for the discussion, share whatever you'd like. Yeah, the floor is yours.
This is Grace from ACCD. I can go first. My share out is going to be relatively short. We've had some administrative staff changes that have sort of made it harder to make progress. Our former chief marketing office was sort of sucked up into AOA, and AOA now has a new communications and marketing office that will oversee our tourism department as well as some other departments. So anyway, all that is to say is that I'm not aware of our current, communications staff structure. But in terms of, developing the communication and engagement plans, obviously the BTDM, which is tourism and digital marketing, is going to be the people that will get the most information from, because that's where the majority of engagement takes place statewide and agency-wide. So I think that is sort of our next target, to see if they have any materials that we can use to assess what they're currently doing. So that's our plan there, once we sort of figure out who the person to contact is and who will be doing that job. Another sort of update is thank you to Sarah from Agency of Ag for sharing materials about the EBSG. We're going to be meeting with finance staff, as well as meeting. I'm being invited to a ACCD senior staff meeting next week to sort of elevate these deliverables and this work and get people more involved. So thank you to Sarah for sending those materials. It was really helpful to like have something to look at instead of starting from scratch. Sorry, one more thing, Carla, I see your hand. Last thing is that we have this agency, well, all agencies have the accessibility project update to sort of update all of their documents to be ADA accessible. Frankly, I think ACCD is extremely behind. We don't have really a lot of capacity and don't seem to be getting more capacity. That is due, this spring. So that's taking up a lot of capacity in terms of like communications and stuff like that. At the division level, we continue to do engagement like within our jobs every day. Last week, Becca and I were fortunate enough to go to Cornerstone Housing Partners in Rutland, and Becca, which is a homeownership center that we provide funding for, to do low-income homeowner repairs. And Becca got to visit 2 homes of really low-income homeowners who had used Cornerstone to, make their place habitable again. So she had, direct community engagement, which is great, but we just need to figure out how to sort of capture what we're doing. Sorry, that was very long, but thank you.
If I may jump in, thank you very much, Grace, for sharing updates on a multiplicity of the deliverables under the EJ law. It's really interesting what the Cornerstone project is doing and what you can achieve. And yes, it would be great to capture some of that in the community engagement plan. I was going to offer, Grace, that as you're thinking about meeting with leadership, if you have any needs regarding support from our unit, please let us know. We're more than happy to support you in that engagement. So just wanted to offer that, Grace.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I probably will reach out. Thank you in advance.
Great.
I'm happy to go next. No one else is wanting to go. Let's see. So I guess as a small covered entity, I guess a lot of our focus has been on the deliverables that are like most immediately in front of us. So, like the EJ complaint reporting stuff, and then the environmental benefits spending report that's due in February. So that's been kind of core focus. We have started working in greater earnest on our language access plan, which I see as a component of the community engagement plan. But yeah, I doubt that too much additional work will get done on the community engagement plan until after we've got the environmental benefit spending report out the door. But I guess I've been mulling over the community engagement plan and how all of our covered entities are required to have our own plans. And I think that there should be a lot of commonalities between these plans. And so I hope that this group can support each other in finding those commonalities and trying to develop consistent plans where possible. And a recurring question that I've had that I imagine other people are having, I understand community engagement when there's like a finite project in a community, like we're building a playground here, provide input on the playground, like that impacts a small group of people, and the core principles of community engagement make sense in that example. What I struggle with, and maybe other folks don't struggle with this, but what I struggle with is how do we do effective community engagement on policy that affects the whole state, so statewide policy decisions. And I feel like the way the law is written, it includes those types of decisions in what we're supposed to do community engagement on. And yeah, I think we all are going to have to address that, and having maybe a common approach, and maybe some agencies already have good practices in place for statewide community engagement efforts. But yeah, I really struggle with, what's sufficient, like what would be too much, what would not be enough. Where's the right balance when you're doing that type of statewide engagement? And maybe if we all had similar principles around that, that would help us to defend whatever we end up adopting. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think that resonates a lot. And I was gonna, well, to your question, I think about coordination and also what is community engagement. I think on the latter, the department has a new outreach program manager who will join us at 2. She has a conflict until then, but she's been encouraging us to think of like anytime we engage with the public is technically community engagement. So I think that resonates with kind of your big statewide view. But to kind of segue into another update, I think a small group of us had started meeting, which is one of the things the department has done. We were organized by Sarah and Abby at Ag, included me and Ricardo from the department and Dave and Amy and other folks from their agencies, that's what we are, to kind of start talking about this. And I think that question came up a lot in the 2 conversations we had, particularly around kind of like a shared understanding of the scope and content that we may all need to include in these plans. Felt like a really big question that the statute does not answer in terms of the brevity of the language. And so also we're feeling like it would be helpful to have some conversation about how we might interpret that language and develop kind of a shared common understanding of what we should be working to include, especially for like agencies like, I don't want to speak for VDH or AOT, but agencies that already have their own engagement plans developed outside of this law, and thinking about agencies who don't yet have those plans. And I think that, yeah, so whether that's a template or just like some shared like common elements, I'm not sure what that looks like, but that was something that we had come out of our conversations about, kind of a core collaboration point that maybe we would benefit from some early discussion on. And then also the second one was just around like a shared process and timeline. And Julia, it's really helpful to see what ANR is working on. But one of the things the department has been doing is trying to develop a work plan. And I think having some shared understanding about, like, for example, when we might engage with the advisory council in a coordinated manner or not would be really helpful for developing that timeline. And whether or not we want to create some like boundaries around that. And then the other like third piece that I think really came out, which Grace touched on actually, was how we incorporate other state of Vermont perspectives from agencies that actually may not be included in these meetings or this deliverable, like the Chief Communications Office. And well, Susanna is represented here, but the Office of Racial Equity and language access, and yeah, how we think about that. So I think to your point, to just like feeling like some collaboration and common understanding about things like that early on would be really helpful. And I don't know, Sarah, Amy, or Dave, if you want to add anything.
Couldn't find my mute button for a second there. No, that encapsulates great. That's a great job summarizing what the thoughts. And I want to point out in the chat too that it sounds like there's some agenda items coming up to address some of these points, or at least provide some space for some discussion around it. I'll just I'll wait for my update if anybody else wants to go first.
I can jump in. or yeah, both of us, I was gonna say. So, the LURB, it administers a statewide permit program. And so we have statutory requirements to engage certain parties in the permit process. That's one area of public touch that we have. We also have statutory responsibilities to develop rules, and the rulemaking process establishes certain stakeholders that have to be involved in our processes of developing rules. And then it also requires certain public hearings and public touch points along the way before the rules are finalized. And those are statutory, but we as a program have a statewide presence, and we also have a statewide reputation. And a lot of people hate Act 250, and a lot of people love Act 250. But we need to, for the first time ever, I think, develop a community engagement plan that not only meets the environmental justice requirements that we have as a covered agency, but for our own, for the good of our program, we need to do this. And we are in the middle of rulemaking around a new jurisdictional trigger, for instance, called Tier 3, that will trigger Act 250 if you have this critical natural resource on your property. No matter what you do, if it touches that resource, you have to get an Act 250 permit. And so we're in the middle of this rulemaking process. We've had meetings in Newport, Rutland, Windsor, and Morrisville, I think, in the last few weeks. And people are coming to these meetings and they are loaded for bear. They are loaded for bear, right? And so that's the kind of thing that we need to navigate as, you know, so not only do we have to have a community engagement plan to meet the EJ law, we have to have one for our program because this new board needs to change the kind of impression or we need to establish a good impression somehow. And it has to be through community engagement. And so one of the problems is we are a program that almost all of our funding, all of our budget is dedicated to paying the people that run the program, almost all of it. And we were not given any money to do community engagement. And as a planner, you know, coming to this new job from, you know, a regional planning commission, I know how much money it costs to do good community engagement. And so wherever we can, you know, work together with the other covered agencies and the rest of the state apparatus to help us with this is going to be absolutely necessary because it's not a time where we're going to be seeing increases to our budgets. So
Before you finish your thought, could you clarify what you mean by loaded for bear?
oh, sorry. So how the heck, you know, who's responsible for establishing who's responsible for getting the word out about this meeting? Because you didn't do it good enough. I talked to 50 people and nobody knew about this meeting, you know, like that kind of thing. And then, you know, we had to meet with the members of the Legislative Rural Caucus, and they're like, you need to notify every single landowner that these Tier 3 areas might fall on, right? You need to notify every single one of them. And this is statewide. And the amount of effort and money that would go into just making that notification is something that, I mean, what the Rural Caucus kept coming at me with was, why can't you do that? Why can't you do that? And I ended up finally just saying, we don't have the budget for that. But as these meetings are unfolding, Alex Weinhagen, the board member who is spearheading the Tier 3 thing, is thinking, maybe we need to notify landowners. Well, where's the money going to come from to do that? So the Rural Caucus they just put forth a bill to be considered, and they put $20,000 toward that. That is not going to do it. And that's just notifying landowners. That's not a community engagement plan. So that's what I mean by loaded for bear, I guess. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Janet. If I could just jump in really quick before we jump to you, Amy. The thing put my hand down before I was ready for it. I just wanted to share that, as you know, ANR's, specifically DEC, does a lot of, or the Department of Environmental Conservation does a lot of rulemaking and permitting and public engagement around those specific things. And I think the thing that I've been mulling over is, of course, there's a lot of really strict requirements around like timing in the rulemaking process that also makes public engagement far less effective.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing that I'm trying to figure out is like, how do we balance that people have low capacity for quote unquote extra while also doing public engagement, which is not extra. It's like we are required to provide meaningful participation to folks, if not under the EJ law, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, right? How do we kind of balance that of like, we don't have a lot of extra resources and we need to ensure that this is a priority. So I'm just putting that out there, that that's also something that we've been thinking about in the context of already really rigidly structured public engagement.
Well, and especially when we have statutory deadlines that
Yeah.
loom past. Actually, something that I've been thinking about, maybe that other people are seeing as well, is that, you know, there were the major changes to the open meeting law last year. And I think that those really have helped us with our community engagement and public engagement, because we have to, I mean, not only our decision making being more transparent because of the change of the way that the board's organized, but, you know, we're recording all of our hearings and meetings now. Those are getting posted on YouTube. There's just a lot more material available to people, not necessarily, that doesn't require them to leave their homes to do that.
Right.
And as we change some of, or as we, you know, continue to update this process, it's hard because it's a lot more work for our folks. You know, we're buying technology and we're like engaging with stuff that we've never had to do before. And a lot of our district, you know, our district commissioners are volunteers basically. And so asking them to have to do more steps and take longer time to make sure that everybody is included, having, maybe this is mercenary, but having environmental justice stuff happening at the same time helps us give them an access point as to why they have to do this.
Right.
It's not just
Yeah.
to like inconvenience everyone or because people are being, you know, overly literal about requirements. It's because there's this other factor that helps give accessibility to things.
Yeah.
So,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I'm trying to leverage things that we already have to do as ways that we can get credit for community engagement, and then use that lens of how can we do it even better.
Right.
Carla, I see your question. It's a great idea, but that 20K is just in a bill that hasn't even been introduced yet, and we'll see what comes out at the end of the session. It might be nothing. So, but yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think this is an invitation. Current times presents us with an invitation to be creative and think outside the box, and, you know, utilize perhaps connections that we've created in the past to help us, you know, reach more people, perhaps with reporters or other folks who may have other ways of engaging with folks. You know, I've been also thinking about, have you seen those cars that have big TV ads, like TV, not TV, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Billboard, sort of
yeah, those,
digital
yeah.
billboard.
Yeah, yes. I was thinking about that, and I actually looked into it, and they're actually not that expensive. I just don't know whether it makes sense in Vermont, so rural. But yeah, I've been
Right
really
around the
thinking
state.
about,
It's a small
yeah,
state.
it is a small
Vermont is also
state.
culturally very anti-billboard. So
Yes. Yes, that's why I'm
really
thinking.
like that.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking about the cars.
Yeah.
That's why I'm thinking about the cars, right? Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about what options we have to get to the folks that we have not succeeded in engaging with. And, you know, we're thinking about doing community engagement for the community engagement plan, but, you know, my thought immediately was, we're going to hear from the same folks. who usually participate in engagement processes.
Yep.
So yeah, that's definitely a challenge.
All right, Amy has been waiting so very patiently to share for VDH, so I'm going to pass it to Amy.
Wow, I love listening to all of this. Thank you. So I'm just looking at your question, Julia and Kim, your questions. The Department of Health does all kinds of engagement, and I'm thinking about this community engagement spectrum, right, from inform to like PowerShare. So I think I don't really have an update except to say that, we have this community engagement guide that is really a best practices around how to like power build with and partner with organizations and entities that are serving marginalized communities. So that's the like focus. It's really, really equity focused. So I think one of the things that's been really helpful in meeting with Sarah and Claire and Dave and Abby and Charlotte Safran from the Department of Health, who's really really good at community engagement, is trying to think about this next step in terms of like, okay, so we have a guide. So how do we get to a plan and what's needed, and how do we really do that as a united state entity? So it's been helpful to kind of like start to have those conversations. So I don't know what that means. One of the next tangible steps for us is to actually meet with legal to see. So we have this guide, and then based on what our group does and how we collaborate and what we think we want to do in terms of like, are there some standard materials that we want to, as a group, have, and then tailor some things? But it sounds like there's some agenda items that are going to get to some of those pieces, but then meeting with legal to figure out, okay, does this meet this requirement? So I think the support that I'm getting a lot of support from the smaller conversation, which has been really helpful, and also just from our larger group. How are we doing this together? That's kind of the piece I'm excited about, and we'll feel supportive as we go through this. Okay, thank you.
I can go next for the Agency of Ag. I will say, so I had been planning to share the participation continuum, which is why I had it so promptly available when you mentioned it. I don't usually just have it open on my computer. Actually, that's not true. Sometimes I do. So I'm Sarah, speaking for the Agency of Ag. Abby's joining us, I think, unfortunately not until 3:30 today. She had some other meetings she had to prioritize. But for the agency, we have an agency-wide EJ committee. So each deliverable has a subcommittee that's kind of trying to focus on that. For the community engagement subcommittee, it's currently myself, Abby, and another divisional assistant director, deputy director. We're starting with an inventory. We're trying to create an inventory of programming by scope. So like, is it a regulatory scope? Is it a granting scope? Like what is the scope of that work, and how does that work engage with the public, and how do they engage with that work? We have a vision of creating a proposal that will be shared with our agency leadership in December of like, here's how we want to create the process we want to use to create the plan, to get their approval and feedback. But I think I would just second what Claire and Amy have talked about, in that we are thinking about both, like, not that they're separate, but maybe like the operations of how do you like actually engage with the public, but also then like the relational component of that as well. Like community engagement is like, happens over a long arc of relationship, and it happens across agency, right? Like I can engage with a farmer who also engages with the Department of Health, who also engages with ANR, and all of those interactions are going to impact how that person engages with the state at large. And so we are trying to think about like, what are our processes? How does the public currently feel about our processes, and how they can or can't engage, or can they even like access those processes? And then trying to figure out what gaps exist. I think public feedback is going to be a big part of at least starting with partners that we work with, and then hopefully having some time for communities to give us feedback, because it's really important. You know, like, I don't know that we could identify all of our own gaps in knowledge about how we engage with the community and communities. I think it's been super helpful to meet in the small group. It's been a bummer that we have to respect quorum in that regard, that like we could only have 4. But it's been really helpful. I think out of that, we have all identified, or at least the agency has identified, like, I would say 4 pieces that I believe personally like span all agencies, and that they're like state of Vermont wide processes that we all need support with, which would be compensation, like allowances and best practice and structures, providing food at events for members, like being able to provide a meal for members for community members is like incredibly hard, if not impossible. And I love providing snacks, but that just doesn't cut it when you ask someone to meet from 5 to 7 p.m. Oh no, I've lost my list. Translation and interpretation is incredibly expensive and complex. I feel like the Department of Health actually is probably one of the like leaders in figuring out those processes. And the
Childcare, perhaps?
Yes, and childcare is the 4th one, that there are like very specific language. My experience is very specific language that can limit childcare provision. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. I co-facilitate a community engagement, community of practice with Charlotte. And so in that community of practice, we talk about the like push and pull of like processes, but also that like it has to be relational work. Otherwise it might still be extractive. Like we can create wonderful operational plans, but they can still be extractive if we don't implement them correctly. I will just also share that we have connected with Rebecca Kelly about community engagement. She's the Chief Communications Officer at the Agency of Administration, and she is incredibly excited about this work. I'm sure she is like past capacity, but every interaction I've had with her seems like she would be a wonderful thought partner and willing to help. So that the agency updates.
I think that is Rebecca Kelly, the Chief Marketing Officer.
She is now the Chief Communications Officer for the state of Vermont.
Got it. Thank you. Just to ask you a quick question, Sarah, for you to maybe share with the group about the community engagement, community of practice. Something that we chatted about a couple of months ago when the IAC met, and maybe you weren't here, is that the community of practice had thrown around the idea of like trying to come up with like a way to inventory or share with everybody in the state community engagement practices that have happened. Is that something that you guys are still weighing, and what could that possibly look like? I wanted to ask because it could potentially be a really helpful tool for this group.
Yeah, we haven't provided an update on that, so that's fair. Hi, Ricarda. So we have actually, so that was one of the things we met with Rebecca Kelly about, that she's really excited about, is creating some kind of internal use inventory where you can understand what across state of Vermont, what agencies are doing, what kind of engagements, kind of what's the scope and who are they working with. But what we're really trying to be careful about is providing enough information and context to support state of Vermont employees to like do their own homework, to reach out to their colleagues in a way to then inform a non-extractive process, not to just like set you up to plop down into a community because you like know someone was there last week and you know who the contact was and you can say their name. I think it will, the beta version, we are going to try to work on this month in December. But I think it will be probably not until next spring that there would be a version that could be like available to this group. But we are hoping to do it. We do have support from Rebecca. We just kind of, there's a lot going on this fall for everyone. So we're just trying to be intentional and give it the time it needs.
Thanks for sharing that. That was a no pressure sort of question. I just wanted, if you had anything to share with the group, that it's awesome that you shared that update. It's no pressure though. Are there any other agencies that haven't shared yet? I feel like we got most folks, maybe AOT, Dave,
yeah.
and Bob.
Oh, I'll go. I've already unmuted if that's okay, Bob. Keep it brief. So we're in sort of a similar place, or I guess what I would say is, AOT is in the position of having a public involvement guide is what it's specifically called. And we do take advantage of that acronym and send a lot of cute pictures of pigs back and forth to each other when we're chatting each other about working on it. There are puns left and right, as you can imagine. So our update process is at the moment has consisted of a small group of us, a few of us in planning and policy, and our communications manager, Amy Tatko, working with some direction and guidance from division leadership as well, just to kind of as we've been moving things along. But we've similar to A&R, just put together a brief survey that we sent across our agency in a pretty targeted manner, kind of to people across all the divisions in our agency that we know participate in some sort of community engagement, whether it be they need to do press releases, they do survey work, they do public meetings or hearings for projects. They develop plans like myself, where we'll be going out to solicit input on the rail system for the state or something of that nature. So we solicited input from several folks and have a little summary of responses to questions, just kind of asking them, what kind of outreach do you do? What are the challenges? Do you know that we have a guide? If so, have you used it? What do you need for support, tools, training? And then concluding with, would you like to be involved in the process to kind of populate a sort of cross-sectional advisory committee for it? So that's for tangible steps, that's one of the first things that we've done, and we're just getting together in a couple weeks, the small group of us, to sort of take a look at the responses and sort of focus our update of our guide around that feedback, as well as the core principles of community engagement. We'll sort of have those will be like our guiding principles to update the guide. There are some gaps since this guide was developed in, I think, 2017. Doesn't include anything on using technology and meetings such as this one. So there's some kind of fundamental tools and best practices that we need to put in there. And then, trying to be responsive to what the folks across our agency have told us they could use for tools in the toolkit, and just to kind of tee ourselves up for some training efforts that'll come afterwards. That wasn't the most organized update, but I think I covered most of what we've kind of have going on right now. Thanks.
Dave, I wanted to know, for your survey,
Yeah.
not asking for any particular reason, it's not like we're also doing a survey. Your agency is so freaking big. It's like I think it's the second largest agency in the state,
big.
right?
Yeah,
So
there are like
what's your response
1,300
rate look
people,
like?
give or take. Well, let me remind though, we did across all divisions and sent it out to, I think, fewer than 50 people, kind of
Okay.
handpicking people that we know just through agency knowledge. Like we
Got it.
knew that if we sent it out to 500 people that are doing maintenance work in the districts that do have like a community engagement aspect to what they do, we knew it just wouldn't be a fruitful effort. And we might get some useful information, but we're trying to do it more targeted and reach out to the director of maintenance, who's worked in maintenance for decades and has kind of seen it all and goes out in the field all the time. And so we tried to hit the kind of really deep pockets of knowledge across all the divisions of the agency. So not scientific by a long stretch, but kind of informed by our knowledge of where the pockets of information sit.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Okay, Bob, last but not least.
Yeah, there you go. I put into the chat the link to the community engagement plan that the AOE currently has. And I guess maybe maybe something that's different with the AOE is that our community that we engage with is really the leadership at the local supervisory union, supervisory district level. It's not with the community in general. So any kind of community engagement that we're doing is all information related to how to help the superintendents and his or her leadership team engage with their school community, which is basically the community members at large in all the towns. And that makes sense, right? Because as we've been talking about, the language having translation capability, the schools all have most of the language instructors who can now be part of those community meetings when talking with the community at large and engage in the language that is native to them. So we have what is thought to be a robust community engagement plan, but it is the community of superintendents and principals and leadership throughout all the state school districts. So in that aspect, there's nothing specific that's addressing EJ populations, but equity and all of the other values that go into that kind of open, equitable dialogue is there in that. So kind of like what Elizabeth said, due to constraints, everybody's focusing on the environmental spending. I think after that happens, there'll be a more concerted effort to start focusing more on anything that has to be done to shore up what's lacking in the communication that we have. The Secretary of Education sends out planned weekly field memos and superintendent updates for anything that needs to be communicated to them that they would then have to communicate to the general public in their school districts, especially now in the time of all the turbulence at the federal level. If there's anything coming out that's going to impact any kind of programming at the school level, the agency is very keen on making sure that information gets out there factually instead of hearing it through the news in a way that perhaps might be misinterpreted. So the communication is very timely in terms of new information getting out to those who need to then roll it out to families in their districts. I think that's it.
I'm looking at the link, Bob. I think it's great. It's a great resource. I like the VETSA too.
Yeah, and I think what they do is they also have links to resources within the state that are not the Agency of Education, linked to resources outside the state of Vermont. And then they have perhaps subject matter experts, for lack of a better term, to contact within the Agency of Education should you have questions about the topic that you're interested in inquiring about. So yeah, I think pretty much it's a good first pass to be going further into EJ. I think it gives us a good launch pad.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. That sounds really cool. I'm gonna have to, I looked at the FETSA, but we'll have to dig into all the other to all the other resources that are there. Thanks everyone for sharing. Is there anything like last minute that folks would like to share in this agenda section before we wrap up and take a quick break before we pivot?
I think I just have one. Again, you might have to tolerate me repeating myself, but kind of like what others had mentioned here before, for agencies that are empowered with rulemaking, if the idea is that community engagement has to be solicited before the rulemaking is actually put forward, right? If they're to be part in a participatory process in developing the rule, it kind of stands to reason that that should go up one level before the legislature imposes the laws that we then have to also engage with the public about, right? And so I think it's more just a philosophical statement. Should legislators, before they make a law, solicit public engagement? And if you think, in other words, what's the difference between that and then an agency having a law they have to comply with, and now they have to go out and solicit public input about how they're going to execute that?
Yeah.
And it's just a question. I'm not looking for an answer. It's just, it would be cool if at that level that was happening, because it would stem the tide of a lot of angst that comes from the fallout of a law that's not popular or being implemented without understanding the full viewpoint of the population it's affecting. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
I feel that comment in my heart.
Claire?
I think I would just wanted to emphasize like kind of the areas I'd shared that I feel like for me it would be really helpful to discuss at some point, if not today, like expectations for consultation with the advisory council, just because that has felt like a big question mark as I think about like developing a plan as an agency that doesn't currently have one. So like just working back from if like the statutory deadline is July 1st, if we have ideas of when the advisory council would consult either on like a whole plan or like components of that, that would just be helpful milestones to like have as benchmarks. And I don't know if that is just more like piecemeal, each agency going to the advisory council, but it feels like more of a collective approach may be appreciated on their end. So I would just emphasize that as a topic of future conversation that would be helpful and supportive.
Thanks, Claire. Just really quick before I get to Sarah, Kim, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on that because I think that we are planning to have a conversation between the IAC and the AC regarding community engagement, and maybe that we can speak to Claire's specific sort of coordinating consultation question during that time. But just wanted to check with you, Kim.
Yeah, so the next joint meeting on November 12th, we're planning on that meeting being focused on community engagement in these plans. And so it'll be a great opportunity for you all to share with the advisory council any substantive challenges you're running into. And then they can also provide some consultation then. And then as you all are further along, we can figure out when to schedule another meeting for the AC to provide more feedback, like once you start having drafts.
Thanks, Kim. Sorry, Sarah, I see your hands up. I think I'm coming from a space of our agency can be extremely deadline driven in terms of producing drafts when we have many competing objectives. So
Yeah,
finding the right balance there of like moving at the speed that it takes, but also having some expectations of specific like check-in points would, I think, just be really helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, so later on, you all will have a working session. I think it would be great for you all to, like in this meeting, talk about that a little bit, like what capacity might look like and a general timeline that'll also be supportive to share that with the advisory council. And then at that meeting on the 12th, you all will have like 45 minutes or so just to talk about this. So that could also be a time to talk about expectations and timing and all of that.
okay, Sarah, I think you can jump in now that
These are just two, maybe I apologize there, I think half-baked thoughts, but that I want to offer as we're talking about like potential asks of AC and timeline. Something that the Agency of Ag has thought about a lot based on feedback on some pretty recent and large scale work that we've done is like, what is the role of closing the loop on follow-up, and should that be a part of community engagement plans and articulated expectations for staff members, which then can be a tool that can go up and down the ladder and sideways towards I need this much time to do this type of engagement because I need to be able to get back to the community. And then maybe I lost my second thought. So yeah, that was it.
thanks, Sarah. If that second thought comes to mind, feel free to put it in the chat or flag us down. Yeah.
It did. I would just like to offer, like, I think something that I've been thinking about is like, is it there's community engagement to like say that I like using myself as an example. We did statewide listening sessions. We went to different places in the state and we did listening sessions. So that's community engagement. But I would offer that that was like not impactful community engagement because there was a whole other body of work that had to happen like around each of those sessions that was like reaching out adequately to the community, making sure everyone like had the same access to and like ample time to know that session existed, right? That we did a good job on follow-up. So I just want to offer that, like as we throw around like different types of how we engage with the community, that I think community engagement, to me, meaningful participation is also like a whole suite of work on the front and back end of any event.
Thank you.
Good point, Sarah.
Carla, do you want to give us the last comment and then we'll take a break?
Yes, sure. But first, I just want to resonate with your comments, Sarah. And at the agency, we are talking about that, like incorporating some sort of feedback loop back to communities regarding their input and how it improved or it was incorporated or what resulted from that input that they provided. So that's definitely something that we are talking about and will be into the future as we get more into the implementation of the work plan, something that we will need to create some guidance on. And what I wanted to also echo is your comment, Bob. And this is particularly resonant with me because when I was at one of those moments before one of the committees um, in the Senate, I actually spoke to the responsibility that they have as a body to implement the policy of the state, right? And so I just put it here and I read it to them and I said, you're not exempted from this. So it's just to echo your comment regarding the responsibility of the legislators to engage around bills and their proposals. Yeah. So very resonant. Thank you for that.
Were they all smiles when you gave them that feedback?
Not the kind of smiles I wanted, though.
They were grimaces?
Yeah, more like a lot of skepticism, like.
Thanks for joining, Grace. I see you're jumping off. Feel better.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that we're gonna take a break. We've been going at it for a little while. Ironically, this is right when Abby jumped on, so you get to immediately come in on a break, I guess.
Perfect.
Kim, how much time do we want to do for the break, do you think?
Let's take a break. Let's go to 3:05.
Okay.
Wait, 45.
Wait, not 3:05.
No.
2:35.
2:35, so a little more than 10 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, does that work?
Yep, that's perfect. Thanks, Kim.
All right.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you.
All right, everyone, welcome back.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, all.
All right, hope everyone was able to do something to take care of themselves during that time and you weren't just reading emails. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes to talk about different community engagement plan formats and different ways to structure them. We originally were going to provide some content, but we realized it might be better just to have an open discussion and we all can kind of talk about pros and cons of different options. So we'll just open the floor and see where we go.
Okay, pros and cons of.
So Kim, do you want to speak
Elaborate
to that a little bit more? Sorry.
Yeah, so let me go into more detail. So we know that there are many different ways to approach creating plans and engagement plans. So instead of us prescribing, like our team prescribing what this conversation could look like, we wanted to just provide space for everyone to share. You know, if you have any ideas of community engagement plans that you've seen or developed, um, and you feel like they're helpful, you're more than welcome to share. If you have ideas about concerns and things that you'd like to get feedback on, you're more than welcome to. In the past, this topic has come up, like you all have spoken about potentially, you know, using an outline, but we just want to provide space to talk about different options and then weigh considerations, figure out what pros and cons might be, especially in the context of each of your agencies. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah.
I just want to offer, before you jump in, Carla, Claire, Dave, Amy, and Abby, I think, have talked about this a little bit outside of the public meeting setting, just kind of coordinating or getting some synergy going. So if you guys have come up with thoughts outside of this setting of like things that could be common across our community engagement plans to build some synergy across the covered agencies, that would be a good jumping off point. Carla?
Thank you, Kim and Juliet. And I was going to mention what Juliet just mentioned, that there have been several members of the IAC that have met to talk about community engagement plans specifically. And yeah, I would like to invite you all to share what's come up during those conversations. And then additionally, I wanted to just pick up on some things that Claire mentioned earlier regarding the content of the community engagement plan and perhaps the opportunity that exists to identify commonalities across the board, common content. And if that is an approach that is attractive and has traction, perhaps we could take that to think a step further into whether there's appetite to consider an across the board format, right? That we could all rely on, sort of like identifying an outline of the components that would be shared across the board, and then assign a space in each agency's community engagement plan to further develop areas that are unique to that agency. So just wanted to kick us off thinking about what's already been shared earlier today by some of you, and also take it a step further into thinking whether that commonality also would benefit from like a standard format.
I'll speak up. Carla, I'm supportive of that idea and that framework of there being the potential for like there's a core plan that addresses things that are commonalities across the covered agencies, like statewide rulemaking and what it means to do community engagement for statewide rulemaking. And then, off of that core plan, obviously each of the entities does unique things and might need to have their own like individualized plan for some of their unique activities. But I think there could be a core plan. And I think that's consistent with the type of feedback we've gotten from the advisory council, that folks don't want to have to look at 10 different plans. They want to go to one place and find most of the answers. And maybe that one place links to the other plans and the other things that are specific to the different agencies. But I'm certainly supportive of something that's like a core plan that we all work on together.
I would also love definitions. I know I say it every single time. I'm sorry. I just love them. Just an effort to make sure that we're all using the terminology similarly, so that like if we're talking about an action group or something like that, we're not talking past each other.
Yeah. Can you give examples of definitions that you think you would benefit from?
I mean, I think if we could specifically, starting from the biggest things, obviously having our definitions of who our communities are that we need to be engaging with. I know that's like the big elephant in the room, but like for example, types of community engagement that we do could be like we do public meetings, but that's not the same thing as like hearings, even though they're both public. So some of us have different types of engagement. If we can actually understand that, like the parts that we are all doing the same types, and then work consistently, that would be really cool. Like I'm really thinking about this more like mailers are public engagement, like you were saying, advertising, things like that. And so to make sure that we're all sort of speaking the same language.
Yeah, so like having definitions of what the different types of engagement are and kind of to be able to clearly delineate them, and also what's our common definition of community engagement in general, and what fits within the scope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who is the community when we talk about it? But that's actually in the statute, so.
Yeah. I'll also just share, because it's been mentioned before, but I'll just repeat it for folks, is that on the 17th, we'll have a conversation with the AC that will hopefully go into executive session, so we can chat a little bit about the EJFP definition and get some legal support with it too. So hopefully you'll get some answers there about that particular element, but I hear you.
The meeting on the 17th?
Yes.
Which I don't think I can go to. You can? What were the times?
Let me look.
The 17th is from 12 to 3.
Yep.
Oh, actually, I don't know if that's been on my calendar. November 17th?
Yep.
It's 11 to 2, I believe.
The one that I have on my calendar, I think, is 12 to 3, Kim.
On the 12th?
On the 17th. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I was looking at the 12th. Cool. Sounds good.
I have the 12th. I don't have the 17th.
I'll forward it to you. Anyway, so Jenny, definitions. Are there any other thoughts?
Not for me.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Janet brought up earlier too is, sometimes no matter how hard you try to disseminate information for people to be knowing of a community engagement meeting, some will always say they were never communicated to, they didn't have the right information. So we almost have to have metrics, it would seem, that say, when have we done something adequately for the average Vermonter to have been informed that there is an opportunity for community engagement. And the other thing that partners with that is, if the budget doesn't allow the ideal to happen, and then you are stymied by the budget limitations. They are real, but sometimes uncomfortable, and they have implications about how effective the community disbursement, the communication disbursement happens. So there's the reality of what we would love to do, but it's always constrained by what we are able to do because of fiscal limitations, and those are real. So.
Yeah.
So I know that I'm just late to the conversation, so I want to be sensitive that if there's anything that I'm asking or kind of offering that's already been discussed, my apologies, let me know and fill me in. I think a bit on process before going back to scope, I was thinking, might it make sense to create a task group that wants to kind of design the deliverable of the community engagement deliverable, similar to what happened around environmental benefit spending guidance? And then kind of like feeling how we, especially on this topic, have more or very robust AC advisory committee engagement, so that there's just real alignment between IAC and AC objectives. That to me feels like the sooner that kind of group and then the semblance, begins working on process and then a semblance of just understanding the scope, the better. I know there are various agencies and departments that have plans and are going to do updates to plans, and all of that may happen regardless of this EJ deliverable. But I think something that I have felt regarding the environmental benefit spending guidance is like, as early in the process, in advance of the deadline, that we can have that kind of like clear process, the better. Because some of our efforts take longer to launch and gain momentum and identify clarity. Or we're all operating on different timelines and capacity.
Yeah.
So that was like my first thought around process, around scope. And I know that it sounds like maybe you guys talked a little bit about kind of like statute interpretation. But when the group that was assembled, that kind of a few of us met, it was really to just be like a little bit to help the Agency of Agriculture. Like, what do you have as a community engagement? Because we have nothing. Like, we're not an agency that has like a very formal process around our community engagement efforts. And so we were really curious what others of you had and what we could learn from that process. And in that conversation, we kind of like re-looked at the statute, and like I had like this real aha moment of like, are we writing agency-wide community engagement plans, or are we doing something far smaller in scope, which again is like, I think as the statute reads, identifying a process for evaluating new and existing activities and programs. And like, I read that like verbatim language as more of like an evaluation tool that we might use in the place of, reviewing our community engagement efforts. Not to say that we don't all need and should be thinking comprehensively agency department wide around a community engagement plan. I'm just still unclear if that's the deliverable in charge per this Act 154.
My hand is not responding to what Abby just said, so if somebody else is, then feel free to go ahead.
Elizabeth, is yours responding to Abby?
No.
Okay. Okay, just really quick, I wanted to share, Abby, I also am interested in talking about that particular language because it's interesting and we should figure out what that means for us. The other thing that I just want to point out, and I'll put the language in the chat, is that the law also says that the community engagement plans need to address how the covered agencies will provide meaningful participation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So in that way, the community engagement plans already have to be pretty broad. The scope has to be broader than just what that one phrase shares. So I'll put the language in the chat, but it is, is that Carla who already put it in the chat? Did Carla beat me to it? Okay, well, yeah, so that's all. I'll pass it to Claire.
Thanks. I mean, maybe my comment is a little bit in response to Abby's because it's a little connected to others, but I do think I just will voice my support for some sort of template or guidance about like a minimum, we'll call it a minimum viable product maybe, which would speak to like meeting the requirements in a coherent way. I think one of the things, maybe it was Sarah, I feel like someone mentioned it, that I would just bring up again around like a consistency element would be like an approach to compensation. But that feels like it would be consistent with the core principles, and it's something that I know a lot of us grapple with. Like for example, when we've done community engagement and have looked for like a best practice, we've looked at the DEC report, which like has some guidance in it, but have also struggled with feeling like, where do we sit on needing to be consistent across agencies in terms of how we compensate for a focus group versus a community partner interview versus all these other types of engagements that we may be doing in different contexts. And I'm not saying that to suggest there may be like a one size fits all scenarios, but like some core set of, yeah, something core and consistent as a starting point feels important. And then the other piece that I had raised my hand was to Bob's point about metrics for success. That came up, I think, in one of our small group meetings of just how we might think about measuring success towards meeting or acting in alignment with our community engagement plans. And that brought a discussion of, I think, two other deliverables that we could think about how this work connects to. One being the environmental benefits spending reports, and how like over the long run our agencies are investing in community engagement in communities across Vermont, and whether that's something we might want to think about. And then the other was a deliverable we haven't talked much about yet, but this sort of annual report of actions taken to advance environmental justice would be potentially another place where, if we did identify metrics to hold ourselves accountable for, we could collectively report in maybe that space. So I wanted to highlight those. Sorry, my last and third point was I would love to hear maybe, because we don't have a community engagement guide. So in terms of formats, like I've read the parts of the VDH plan and I printed out the AOT plan, but Dave, I don't know, I could say I've read it yet, but I would love to hear from you both at some point. Like if you think there are components of your existing documents that work really well for your agencies that would be worth carrying through. I mean, I could certainly speak to what I find compelling in them as well, but I think that would be helpful to hear as we get started.
Is it my turn? Okay. And maybe this is, I don't know, a couple comments back. But we've been talking about the concept of our fiscal limitations in implementing community engagement plans and the core principles of community engagement. And one thing it raises for me is, yes, right now we are fiscally limited. We also have the power to go to the legislature and say we need money, and they can tell us no. But like, are we doing our due diligence if we don't go and make those asks? And I'm just putting that out there as a like question to all of us, that like this year, as we're contemplating working on these plans, should we also be going to the legislature and saying, you know, this work requires funding? And then when they tell us no, then we can at least in our plans say there's no funding. But just raising that. And then another thought that's been percolating in my mind is like, wouldn't it be great, and this probably will never happen, but wouldn't it be great to have a state office of community engagement that was what they did day in and day out, and they supported all of us in like doing this type of work correctly, organizing these events, providing the supports of translation and food and childcare and that kind of thing. I mean, that's the kind of tool you need to like, for a lot of us to do this right. We've been working on report over the past couple months, and there was a call for us to do more engagement. And we were like, well, we don't have funding, and we aren't experts in this, and we're small, and us organizing an event like this is not what we do day in and day out, and having that kind of support in the state would be ideal in implementing something like this. But yeah, just putting that out there, especially about the funding piece of like, do we need to be going to the legislature as a group and just raising the thought that we probably all need more funding if we're actually going to do this work the way it's supposed to be done.
I think those are wonderful ideas. Like if you look at some of the stuff that's going on with the redistricting task force for schools, they have a facilitator. They're just gifted at leading the discussions and stopping rabbit holes from happening. And so I think that's a wonderful idea to have a centralized state office who are experts in doing this, who can then deploy help for each of the agencies on particularly challenging community engagement efforts. So I applaud that idea. That's awesome.
Yeah, along those lines, and not that I'm in a position to assign additional responsibilities to anyone, but like we have a chief marketing office, like we have a Office of Racial Equity. I mean, there are some entities. We have a chief communications officer in state government. I mean, like there are some positions that could have a role related to these community engagement plans. I don't know capacity. I don't know like if they would identify and say that these feel like that, like this deliverable or this a template in this feels kind of related to them. Yeah, and I think Amy, your new health equity office is a perfect example. And not that, Elizabeth, not that I don't feel like there's a need for advocacy for the covered entities having capacity and resources to do this work. I think that's been a challenge from like the day that Act 154 passed. And I don't know that we've sufficiently addressed this or kind of like unified around a strategy yet. And yet we're still beholden to some deadlines as best I understand. And so, yeah, I don't know. It feels like there's some other folks that like may already have positions in state government that we could engage on this conversation to see both what they have for capacity or collaboration suggestions or alignment with kind of focus and scope of their work.
I appreciate this conversation. I'm noticing that there's like two kind of tracks of conversation happening. One being things that we can do related to the community engagement plan deliverable that are kind of within the parameters that we currently are living in, and then also having conversations around like, well, how do we change these parameters too, because they're not necessarily realistic. And so I think that both of those conversations are really important. And I think especially the changing of parameters conversation is one that could also be had with the advisory council, because they are folks who have a lot of passion for this work and could also provide us with a lot of support in terms of being advocates for the law. Not to throw in their capacity, also make assumptions about their capacity. Who knows? I'm just saying that I think that the advisory council would love to be involved in this more strategic conversation around building capacity and like more recognition of the importance of this work. And I also think that in terms of what we can tackle within the parameters that we've had set, that's something that I would be interested in fleshing out more before we close out this meeting, just so that we can start with some tangible action items, and then we can figure out when we meet with the advisory council what those like maybe less tangible or broader action items could potentially look like. Just putting that out there. Carla?
Yes, thank you, Juliet, for that. And I would also like to offer that the Office of Racial Equity may be a good resource to help us situate ourselves in the larger conversation with, the governor's office. And I think they are particularly well situated for engaging around this one particular deliverable. So, having conversations with Susanna about how her office can support this work differently may be of value. Additionally, I was gonna offer that I think the advisory council is the entity that's really well situated to advocate before the legislature um, for for getting the support that we've been needing from the beginning from the legislators. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise going on here. But yeah, I just wanted to offer that the advisory council, and perhaps this is a conversation that should be had when we meet with them in next week, specifically around community engagement. And I know this is a larger conversation that we've had in terms of what are the distinct roles and what can the AC do to further enhance and support our work so that we're more effective in actually fulfilling the deliverables under the law. And community engagement is something that they've actually expressed incredible interest around. So then that strategy conversation should be had with the advisory council. And then, yeah, reach out to Susanna and have a really tailored conversation about community engagement per se and what can be done to centralize some of this work.
So I think that we're kind of coming to the close of the section of the agenda where we were just going to be discussing. And we'd like to give you an opportunity to just move into like a pretty decent chunk of time for like a working session to maybe think through those more tangible action items for the community engagement plan deliverable, maybe thinking about what Amy offered of like, I think it was Amy. I could be just attributing this to anybody, but identifying kind of commonalities across each community engagement plan for the covered agencies, or what Abby offered of maybe developing a task group. So I think we'd like to move into a working session. Kim, do you want to provide an introduction to that?
So what we have listed on the agenda is that you all will, I'm just summarizing again what Juliet shared, and we'll put it in the chat. Define your community engagement development process, determine how you want to structure your plans, determine what needs to happen outside of the public meetings. And then the outcomes are for you all to leave with a clear map of the committee's process and teams. Like if you want to create a working group or something like that. And then also that each IAC member will leave with 1 to 2 concrete steps to move their process forward. And then after that, you'll have a debrief for 10 minutes where you can identify and actually assign tasks. So yeah, you all can take about 45 minutes to do that.
Okay. In small groups or as a whole group, or sorry,
This is
not quite.
unstructured. This is unstructured, so it's totally up to you all.
Okay. You know, one thing I was just telling Juliet during the break is that the LURB has an enormous amount of statutorily required work with deadlines through the end of next year. And I think I'm looking at the language of the deliverable. The agency will engage with environmental justice focused populations as it evaluates new and existing activities and programs. And even though I think that we need an agency-wide community engagement plan that goes beyond just that, I think that the only thing we're going to have capacity for before July 2027 is to focus on that. And that's why I asked the question in the chat as to when the mapping tool was going to be available, because that's going to be refined from what we understand currently as the environmental focused populations in the state of Vermont,
Right.
which right now is like the whole state.
Yeah.
So,
We're also supposed to be policy building and mapping in our work, thinking about environmental justice populations. And this is the bell I've been reading for a long time, but we don't know where they are right now. And we're still trying to policy build around them.
Right. Yeah. Pinning that until November 17th. But I hear you. It is definitely difficult to coordinate.
I feel like earlier in the conversation, there was a lot of agreement around the concept of like a core. I think in the small group, we said core content. And then also, I think in this group, it was also referred to as core structure. I'm curious if that feels accurate to folks and if it feels like taking some time to maybe like try to outline what that could be would feel helpful.
Carla put some bullets in the chat.
yeah, Carlin had a bulleted list.
I think that would definitely be helpful. And also maybe as we start doing that, we could go back to like hearing from Amy and Dave, if you guys have readily available thoughts about anything that you have found particularly like helpful or unhelpful about your current structures in terms of the guides that you have. I know Amy just left, so I guess Dave, I kind of just put you on the spot, but maybe Amy will be back soon. Perfect.
She's still there.
Manifested her. Amy, I was saying that Sarah was talking about in our structured working time, maybe diving deeper into like the structure or content of like a core product. And I was suggesting maybe we could go back to one of my asks previously, which was hearing from you or Dave about, given your existing documents, like what you feel works well, what doesn't work well, as we like kick that off.
Is there time to speak to it now? I was just catching a kid off the bus, so thank you for bearing with me. Is there a second to speak to that? Dave, did you get to, well, did you, I'll go. I mean, I hope I didn't miss yours, but
go ahead. I was just queuing up my document
Okay.
so I can speak more intelligently when it's my turn.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
I'm going to buy you some time, not look at our documents, but just speak on the fly. But I think that one of the things that I'm finding from the guide, which has the core principles, but it is best practices, and then doing this like workforce development and trying to implement it, is there's a lot of level setting. Like it's going back to whoever made the ask for the definitions. I feel like that piece, and there are definitions in that like front matter, and just like, what are we talking about? What are best practices? That community engagement, the continuum is on there, which I think does some level setting, but it also invites people, programs and initiatives into seeing what they are doing. Because I think when I work with like my colleagues, I think a lot of times there's a lot of interest in doing it, but just not knowing how or where to start. Or so I think that there's those level setting pieces in terms of we can incorporate some of that core content in hours around like, what are we talking about in terms of community engagement? What are the different kinds of partners, general public, people who are working with marginalized communities? So all of the like different kinds of engagement and what we mean by community engagement. So some of that is what I've been thinking about. There's also a really cool section on common barriers and solutions. Again, that's like working with we're really trying to advocate to focus on focused populations. So really working and partnering with people who are serving underserved populations. So again, that's kind of the nature of our work. So those are just some quick thoughts. Dave, did I buy you enough time to talk about yours?
You did. It was perfect. I just dropped something in the chat. We'll see if it works. I just took a little grab, like, and you know, Claire, you asked the question, it's super tiny, right? Does it get bigger when you click on it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that works for you. So that's from the front of our public involvement guide. And you asked the question, Claire, of like what works, what doesn't. And we got some feedback directly on that in the little survey that we did. And I was just reminded that even among our kind of improvised little working group right now, we've identified that when this guide was put together initially, it was very much oriented toward the highway division of our agency, which sort of needed and kind of struggled with some consistency and sort of best practices, and just a protocol for public engagement. And so you'll see in that it's not exactly the table of contents, but it sort of represents the major sections of the guide. I'm reminded of that. And so the first section there you see is like a quick reference based on the project development process. And that's very like bricks and mortar oriented. And I think what we're going to try to do is reformat this a little bit to be more, not to necessarily lose that completely, but to be more of an agency oriented guide, and acknowledging that we do a lot of other things other than just bricks and mortar projects, even though that's the most visible part of what we do, and that the engagement part of everything what we do is really more of the purpose and the point of the document. The other thing that was shared was that it's too long. Like it's just, I don't know, it's 50 or 60 pages or something like that. And I think less is going to be more, even if we have appendices or like other documents maybe to lead them to. And that was one reason I really liked what Amy shared from the health department, in that it's kind of a toolkit and kind of quicker access and way more approachable for somebody that's like, what do I need to be doing? So that's something that's on our minds as well. And the one other thing that I'll share while I'm yapping is that I think it will be helpful in acknowledgement that at least for our agency, that there's a whole like spectrum of different types of engagement that we do for different purposes, is going to be to have sort of a table of with, I just envision it as like, what are you working on? Is it a plan? Is it a project? Is it a press release? Et cetera, kind of what are you doing on the left? And then across kind of a matrix of these are the strategies or tools that you should consider and or employ, or kind of the steps that you should consider. Again, just in the spirit of trying to keep things accessible and kind of just approachable for staff who are trying to do a lot of other work, and kind of we need to make this as kind of approachable and accessible to be successful with. Those are my thoughts.
Hi. Yeah, that's all super helpful. I'm wondering whether anyone else has comments regarding the conversations that you've all had outside the public meetings. If not, I would like to offer some of the things that we've been thinking about, and identify whether that could be, in terms of a common approach or framework, something that would be useful to apply to the outline of sorts that we would be putting together. Okay, so in thinking about clarity for staff and usefulness of the document, also thinking about capacity and resources or the lack thereof, we've been exploring the idea of tiering engagements. And with the tiering would come different levels of rigorosity of sorts, right? Like that would be prescribed under each of the phases. So rulemaking, we know that it's attached to a lot of regulatory requirements, right? That we cannot forego. So in terms of thinking about tiers and what resources would go into supporting our staff doing that engagement, one could think that that would be high level of or resource intense, right? Because the energy needs to focus on meeting the timelines, hitting the milestones so that we can provide information coming from communities to inform the rule. If what we're thinking is that we're engaging in an iterative process with communities before the rule is finalized, and not only just one engagement that can be sort of like pro forma, right? So then thinking about tiers, and then identifying under each of the tiers what kind of capacity it needs to be successful, and then identifying separately the methods that would inform each of the tiers or could inform each of the tiers depending on, and that would be another phase of assessment depending on whether it's statewide, if it's regional, if it's local. And what I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, regarding your question about how to do statewide and what could be deemed successful in terms of statewide engagement, is that in our experience, doing the language access plan was very helpful in identifying methods to engage for the different levels of engagement. So then for statewide, and we created a tiered approach too, because the tier approach really allows us to assess for capacity and resources and then employ really what's needed to be successful in each of the identified tiers. So with the language access plan, what we ended up doing is for statewide, we would translate into a certain number of languages, right? The Office of Racial Equity recommends 13. We ended up recommending 6 because of capacity restraints. And there are caveats, right? If it's a regional project and we can identify which languages are spoken, most spoken, then we would translate into those. So I am thinking about a similar approach to our community engagement plan. But in terms of identifying what kinds of resources would be necessary and what kind of techniques or best practices could be employed. And then either identifying by type of activity or identifying depending on like certain communities. Of course, we have the question about EJFPs, and we will, talk about that in a upcoming meeting. So there's a lot yet that we need to figure out with regards to that one ask in statute, that we need to identify environmental justice focused populations in our community engagement plans. And that may actually yield another approach. But yeah, we're just thinking about tiering the engagements, identifying the level of engagement and how deep to go into communities, and also create awareness across the agency. And I think that's something that Dave mentioned earlier, creating awareness at the agency level on what the different engagement practices are and methods that are utilized, so that when it's needed, and I like the idea of a table, staff can go to that table and then very clearly identify, okay, this is the kind of engagement that I am doing and it's going to reach this certain geography, then I should look into these methods. And then you could then elaborate on that content elsewhere. So that's very initially some of the thoughts that we've discussed internally.
Carla, have you written it down?
The tiers?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, we are. So as Juliet indicated, we created a community engagement task group, and we just finalized the surveying, the assessment of the practices. The idea is that we're not prescribing approaches, but rather we're offering options, and the decision making will come actually from program staff on what is most useful to them. In having conversations, like hallway conversations with folks, it seems to be the preferred approach to just tier engagements, because that would allow us to also assess for capacity and resources, and then accompany the tier with the potential methods that could inform that engagement process. But again, we are very, very early stage at the agency. We're going to move next into the scoping stage, which will ask the question of what kind of engagements will fall under the scope of this plan.
Just to add to what Carla said really quick, I think that this group and what we develop as a full group here in terms of scope will be really helpful to inform what Carla just mentioned. So we do have ulterior motives for this meeting today. Bob.
So I love that idea of the tiering, especially when you take a look at what the task is, and like we're supposed to solicit community engagement development on the development, implementation, enforcement of any law, regulation, or policy. That's like 3 different steps, right? So who communicates to the powers that be the time expansion for any rule, regulation, or policy to now get rolled out? Like if you're under some sort of legislative mandate or governing body like the State Board of Education in our case, and they say by this time you will have this done, if they are not cognizant of the impact of all of this field work, their timelines might be unachievable, but non-negotiable. No matter how compelling you can make the story, that to be compliant with 154, we can't do it in the timeline you've already locked us into. I think that's a really important point that can't be underestimated.
I agree. I mean, you know that, Carla, you had to go back to the legislature and say, we can't do this in this amount of time, and ask for more years, not just months, right? And yeah.
I think I would like to speak like from my not helping Abby with EJ capacity and for my like personal role or my other role capacity. I think something I'm struggling with hearing as someone who does community engagement and has heard a lot of feedback from the farming community about community engagement that I just can't quite parse out is like, regardless of the intentionality of like of how the state goes in when there is a deliverable at hand, if there is not consistent tending to relationships when there's not a deliverable at hand, I think that that is still extractive. And so I don't know the answer to that, but I just want to like name that I think like part of this is like, yes, when we are doing formalized work, how do we do that intentionally to make sure it's accessible and to make sure environmental justice focused populations can like access that work that we do. But also like, I think for me, the bigger question around community engagement, and which can't be separated, is like, how do we have relationships with the communities that our programs are meant to serve and that our legislation is meant to support, so that it's not just a one and done ask, regardless of intentionality of the structure? Because we get a consistent feedback that like, no matter how intentional we are, when we go in, they know when we go in, it's because we have a reason. And so we can create wonderful, beautiful plans. But if we're not tending relationships long term, like they are still extractive. Sorry, Abby, if that was out of turn.
Oh, no, it's actually, I was thinking along the same lines. And so you always can help me kind of frame it a little bit better, I think. The piece that is coming to mind for me is where in this process resulting in a CEP deliverable do we incorporate kind of like the culture change in government, which is that like, and you spoke to this, Bob, that like we are given unrealistic timelines for inclusion of community engagement on a routine basis. We often engage in extractive relationships. We don't always have transparent communication about the feedback that we receive when we talk about the end result of what we're going to do. And we don't have a consistent and appropriate way of compensating people for their contribution and their time. And like those still to me feel like fundamental cultural changes that unless we make those in government or we identify that those need to be made in government, pretty plans mean very little. I mean, they will make some improvement because I think it will drive some intention. And so maybe that's the mindset that I have to get into is like, we may only get so far in the plan that we're going to put in place by 2027, and that culture change may come after that. But I still need to put I need to get my head around like, if I remove all those, like ideal government would be better serving its constituents and our communities if we could address these cultural pieces and we can like work with what we already can do as insufficient as it currently is, or do we try to embed those components into a vision of a CEP?
These
I just
are
wanna-
all really good questions and I think unanswerable. You know, what I can offer from my perspective is that um, we should perhaps afford ourselves a little bit of grace, you know, when we think about this area of work, because you're 100% right, Abby. This one deliverable does not do anything on its own. You know, if we just sit together and write a really good, comprehensive community engagement plan, and we don't have the resources nor the understanding is developed among the folks who are to implement the document, it's just not going to go anywhere, you know. And I could say something along the lines of, yeah, well, we start one engagement at a time. And I can provide you with an example of our little unit engaging around the core principles of community engagement. You know, it's like we held several public meetings, had a really good in-depth conversation. We actually answered questions, which is something that is kind of not standard procedure, right? Depending on the questions that come our way and what kind of engagement it is that we are holding. And afterwards, we followed up with the individuals. And not only that, but we showed them where their feedback was incorporated and how it informed the documents. And that, did it do something meaningful to change perspectives and to build trust perhaps amongst those individuals? And then we haven't done much else. So, you know, I think it's a matter of consistency. And I think this one deliverable may help us coalesce behind what are we committing to do consistently, and then hold each other accountable to the content of that document by by releasing into the world, right? Like saying these are the things that we're committing to do. And of course, recognizing that there are limitations, but also holding ourselves accountable to the fact that, yes, we're very limited. We're likely to continue to be limited in terms of resources and capacity. And yet, I am committing to do the best I can with what I have. And hopefully, most of us do this for enough time that then there's a perceived there's a different way in which government is seen. I don't think we're there, but that's not to say that sometime in the future we will. But yeah, I share all of your concerns, all of your questions. I don't know that there are satisfactory answers at this point, but I love that we're asking ourselves these questions.
I think I would just offer I maybe it's the conversation we're having speaks to like another component of a like core plan. And like for example, one of the aspects of BDH's plan I really like is that spectrum of engagement. I like that BDH really tailored it from the state perspective because I feel like that makes it very approachable to state employees, and it's kind of explicit about where like the power state government holds and how it's doing that. But I wonder if this conversation is pointing towards like another component is like speaking to explicitly like understanding that trust building is a long-term process, and some like even if it's just a commitment or like intention or some initial steps that agencies can take towards investing in that with regards to like systems or practices. I'm not totally sure, but that feels like it would be consistent with the core principles right around like moving at the speed of trust and how they speak to that. And that would be a way to show that the plans here and hope to advance some of those objectives. Because I will just say, Carla, I resonate with what you said about like doing an engagement and then not like feeling like you did that particular engagement to the best of your intention and not really having the capacity or systems in place to follow up. Because I feel very similarly about the engagement work we did on renewable energy policy a few years ago that I think was generally well received and a good experience for us, but because we didn't have systems in place to continue the relationship building that we started, and a variety of other things, like it felt like it just kind of stopped, right? And it hasn't really continued. And hopefully having Ricardo's position at the department will help shift some of that. But that what you said like really resonates with me in terms of, yeah, doing well in like in a unique engagement, but not like connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
And the legislature totally ignored that engagement. Okay.
Yeah, that speaks to the culture, right? There's a sense in which the legislative body does what they do, and then it ends there, and then the burden is shifted to agencies to actually do right by the process that's actually not well built to support that engagement in the way that it's even like written down. But I was going to offer, Claire, what you were saying made me think that perhaps another component could be engaging long term with CBOs, and not only around discrete projects or deliverables or mandates in law, but more of a relationship building, right? If there's a conversation that's being had at an agency and there is an entity in our state that has particular expertise, inviting those folks into the conversations and treating them as peers, as opposed to just going and then eliciting, using, and then not engaging with those folks again. And so, and there may be an opportunity where there's either synergy created or mutually beneficial relationships arise from that. Like regular engagement or informing of, hey, we're the Agency of Natural Resources and we're having conversations about X and Y. Would you be interested in, talking with us about your perspective? But doing that systematically, and maybe the way to do that is to elevate that to the plans, CBOs, community-based or organizations. Sorry.
I use a lot of acronyms too.
Yeah, as I am talking about being accessible and reaching to folks in plain language.
This whole conversation, I'm really fast. I mean, I keep tripping over that stuff. Like we were talking about, oh, tables are a great way to reduce the volume because if the document's too big, it feels inaccessible. But then, then we run into the accessibility issue with tables, and it's, I'm really trying to remind myself that perfect is the enemy of good in this process.
So Carla, what you're speaking to, though, I keep harping back on this. The paradigm shift has to happen at a higher level for this to all actually work, right? Because kind of like what Sarah was saying, it's all wonderful to make this pretty document, but unless it's actually something that we can do, it's just an action to check off the box that say we did it, and it results in no positive change. So it would be wonderful if you could have an audience, or whoever could have the audience at the start of every legislative session, and we say, this is all part of what you're doing. You have to consider the ramifications of this law you passed when you pass any subsequent law from this day forward. And if every legislative session could start with that, and with supportive dialogue that says it is going to expand the time within which any of your initiatives are hopefully going to be achieved. And it may not happen in your biennium. It may happen after you're out of office after 2 years. But I mean, it's that kind of paradigm shift that has to happen if we're really going to seriously say we're doing what we're saying we're going to do. And I really wish, in parallel with our efforts here, there was someone at the higher level convincing the governor and the legislators, key legislators, leaders, you have done this already. We're only responding to the law that you've already passed. And this is what you have to do subsequent now to support us in achieving this. So it's a recognition that timelines have to be realistic. It's a recognition that what Elizabeth was saying is we're going to be asking for more money, right? And these things have to happen if it's to be done effectively, well, and sustainably.
I appreciate that. All of this, actually, this is really lovely. I appreciate this conversation, if not my lack of articulation. Carla, I really appreciate how you described this deliverable as like, this is what we as a group are agreeing to do to like increase meaningful participation, and like we are here to support each other in accountability. And I agree that a lot of this feels like above and beyond what we can do. But I feel like in that conversation, I also heard some very tangible pieces, right? Like, what if every covered agency, like we as a group said, we want a compensation process that all of us are using that is the same? Like, what if that's step one, right? That's in our plan. We all have clear and uniform like translation and our interpretation standards when you go out into the community or have an event, right? Like we try to figure out childcare, language, like these feel like things that feel more tangible, I think, at this level. And I know in the community of practice, we hear it at a very individual level across state of Vermont. But that would be a huge step, I think. I think the other one that I just want to mention that hasn't been talked about is like training for state of Vermont staff members in like how to acknowledge harm. Like that is something, like we have so many trainings about risk mitigation, identifying and mitigating risk. And I feel like staff members, state employees should be trained in like how to be a state employee and go into a community or work with anyone and like work through that, like, right, like trauma-based work I assume always has training associated with it. We do that all the time in our interactions. But those feel like super tangible and helpful to make uniform across these agencies.
It just jumping from off one of the points you made, I think the childcare example is a great example of why like there needs to be a set of like core things that we're all doing the same. I have no idea where we would begin with like trying to organize childcare for a public meeting. I've never had to do that as anyone on this call. And yeah, just like a question like that is something where just having a standard that we're all applying and like resources that we're all using or something like that that's consistent would be very helpful.
So this is why I love working with all of you, and particularly with Sarah, when you bring up kind of this like harm acknowledgement and reduction. And like my first reaction to that is, I don't know how to do that. I hope that I don't cause harm every time that I engage with the community and the public, but I do need to acknowledge that I don't believe that our agency knows how to effectively do that. And like, again, writing a plan of how we're going to do that when we are so far from the experts and actually like a common contributor to harm and poor acknowledgement and lack of transparency. And, like the list could go on. I feel like these plans, to be valuable, even if they are somewhat aspirational of where we want to go, I think we need knowledge and expertise from outside of this group to be able to write this or write parts of it. And maybe that's the other list that we make, which is like, what are the common and standard core components? What are the pieces that we have great templates from AOT and VDH and DEC and other places to sort of build upon? And then where are the areas that like we don't actually know how to do? And even just like referencing it from the core principles isn't sufficient, but like we need to bring in expertise.
Yeah, Abby kind of went where I raised my hand to go. So I'll just add, I think the other benefit of this collective work, if we can do it in a coordinated way, could be identifying unified barriers that we face, like what Carla just put in the chat around childcare, kind of the challenges around providing that. And sounds like some like A&R and AOT, and I feel like somebody else, maybe it was Ag, mentioned doing inventory of current practices and experiences. I know Ricarda and I have talked about doing some similar baseline work here, and feels like that's a real opportunity to identify those collective barriers and then advocate as a unified voice for maybe there is something that needs to be changed statutorily for us to do this work. And a collective of agencies making that ask is stronger than just one singular. So I've just been mindful of the time, and I know Kim had said we should wrap this conversation up at 3:45. So I wanted to come back to what you had mentioned at the beginning, Abby, about in our small group, we've had this question of whether or not there's interest or there would be value in having a small task group to continue this conversation maybe more frequently than we can have it in full IAC meetings. So I guess I would just come back to that. Curious if there is interest, and if so, like who might be interested in participating. And the other option we've talked about is just maybe we can continue this conversation in IAC meetings, and maybe if that is the preferred path, thinking about what that could look like as well. So either way, I know I would not volunteer to be on a task group, but Ricarda would.
Sure. I'll also add to that. I think that so I've been leading the community engagement plan work internally at A&R, so I would love to be involved in a task group of this nature, I think that it would be really good. I'll also add that we've been trying to keep track of all of the like recommendations that have come up as potential common components of a community engagement plan, and that's in the chat. So you guys already did a lot of the structure building. Now it's just a matter of sitting down and making something come of those suggestions. So I think that whoever wants to be on the task group, seems like we already have some pretty good direction.
Remind me to avoid quorum, we have to have less than 5 agency departments represented,
Less than 6, yep.
less than 6. And Julia, do you count as one of those or no,
No,
you don't? Okay, thanks.
I do.
Yay!
Carla counts.
I do, but Juliet doesn't, nor Kim.
Jenny just said you count to us.
If I felt like I had bandwidth, I would love to be part of it, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't possibly.
Yeah, that's okay. It's better to say that than to commit to something that won't work. So
I'm really interested in what they come up with, if there is one.
So just being mindful of the time, would it make sense for at least Sarah, Juliet, and Ricarda, none of whom would count towards quorum technically, at least to follow up? And then if you're interested, you could reach out to the 3 of them to join around scheduling, and then maybe you guys could meet once or twice and then think about when it would make sense to have like another conversation about like either a further fleshed out kind of set of core content, or like places where you have questions that the broader group would have benefit from having conversation.
yeah.
Is that clear? I also wonder if we can add to the joint meeting
Mm-hmm.
on, I guess it would be the 17th, well, the 12th. I guess we could do either. To solicit AC members that would also be interested in being on the task group.
Good call.
We have a sense of who from the AC is interested. We've been asking them about the Community Engagement Task Force, but now we have a fully appointed advisory council. So we should have conversations with the group as a whole to see whether any of the new members are interested. And I wanted to say that I am very interested, but right now, because of the next deliverable that we're putting together, the community burden rulemaking, I will not have a lot of capacity in November and December, but starting January, hopefully I will be freed up a little bit more because I'm doing internal engagement during November and September and December on the cumulative burden rulemaking, which we are all gonna be talking about it soon. So prepared.
Everybody's on the edge of their seat now, Carla.
I know. I walk into a room and I'm like all excited, and then I said community burden rulemaking, and everyone's going, really?
So it sounds like at least between now, like in a couple of weeks or so, myself, Ricarda, and Sarah, maybe we can find an opportunity to chat. Maybe we can get some advisory council members on. I'm also just going to say out loud, I'm going to acknowledge it, that there's a lot of things happening in the outside world that is affecting the areas of work that our advisory council members work full time on outside of the state. And so I don't want to make assumptions about their capacity. I'm just putting out there that it's really awesome to get them involved, but also everything is hard right now. So just saying that. So it sounds like we have a couple of action items, and if there are any other thoughts that folks have about things that they'd like to see as a common component in the covered agency community engagement plans. I think rather than potentially risk quorum over email, just send any thoughts to Kim and I, and we'll keep track of them and make sure that they get addressed again at a later date. Obviously, we're closing this conversation for this meeting, but it doesn't mean the conversation stops. So, you know, our inboxes are always open. Also, if you ever just wanted to chat over Teams, that's possible as well. So I think, you know, the last thing that we want to address with you guys is a couple of updates that have nothing to do with the community engagement plan deliverable, because I'm sure after the last almost 3 hours of talking about just this one deliverable, you all want maybe like a nice break from that. Kim, would now be an okay time to start with updates?
Yeah, I can do that real quick. So for the mapping tool, the community engagement RFP, so that process has ended. The selection committee has started meeting, and so the review process is going on. We're meeting tomorrow, actually, for the third time to start talking about some of the proposals. And then in terms of the benefit spending report, technical assistance, I have a request for all of you to just individually send me and CC, Juliet and Carla, an update, just really briefly, of what you, like where you all are at with that, and then what specific needs you have, so that we can start developing our technical assistance a little bit, like refine it. And then another note about that is I still have everyone's availability. And so once we kind of hear from you and see what it is that you need, we'll start sending out dates for that. And then Carla mentioned we're going to be talking about cumulative burden rulemaking. So the November 17 meeting, that's the one that we had mentioned we would go into executive session to talk about the EJFP definition. We'll also be talking about cumulative burden then. And then just a reminder, I think the majority of you filled out the December scheduling forms, so that's great. I'm going to send a reminder to a few of the advisory council members who still need to fill them out, and then tomorrow we'll send some holds just to get something on your calendar. If you can, accept the invites that work for you as soon as possible, and then yeah, we'll take it from there. So
I'm sorry, can you repeat that the first deliverable of what you want to hear from us again? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I didn't process quickly enough.
Oh, no problem. The spending report technical assistance, you know, because the reports are due in February. So we wanted to provide some support, but it would be great just to get some feedback from each of you about where your agency is and any specific needs that you have, so that we can figure out how best to structure the technical assistance sessions.
Do we know when the environmental benefit spending guidance will be next discussed on an agenda, or did you give us a date by when you want that status and TA needs?
If you could do it in the next week or two, that would be helpful. We'll include that. We'll put it in our follow-up email, but as soon as possible would be great.
So we're probably not talking about them until January again. Is that my sense then, or
Yes,
December?
well, at least for November, we won't talk about them, possibly in December. But we'd like to start doing the technical assistance as soon as possible. So.
Okay.
And just to be clear, we're looking at office hours. So outside.
That's what I was going to ask. So is it one-on-one, or you're saying office hours that are open?
Yeah, we're looking at we're looking at office hours so that we can have conversations about, like, freely about the spending reports, the baseline reports, communities, all of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is about, you know, what are your needs right now? And then timing, we're thinking about December, maybe early mid-December, depending on what we receive from you all, because that's how we're gonna structure it. Because if there's a lot of alignment, then perhaps we just meet into groups and then have those conversations. But if there are some of you who are needing very specialized technical assistance, then we will meet with you separately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 3:55. We should end the meeting 5 minutes early. That
Okay.
feels
Whatever
good.
you say, Kim.
That'll be great. We went through everything, so we appreciate you
Wow.
all. And yeah, this was a wonderful meeting. So we'll see you on the 12th. It's been a year since you've seen the advisory council. So
And
yeah,
we have new members.
Yay!
everyone, have a great weekend.
All right, bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
folks. Bye.